The American B-17 bombers had just returned to friendly territory after a successful shuttle bombing operation deep in German territory. They had taken off from the United Kingdom and were now refueling at Poltava Airfield, Ukraine. They were part of Operation Frantic. In a surprising turn of events, Joseph Stalin had allowed the U.S. to establish 3 airbases in the USSR as long as defending them fell to the Soviets. Besides the obvious benefits of striking the Axis from the Eastern Front, the Americans also sought to develop amicable post-war relations with the Soviets through the mutual cooperation of the U.S. and Russian airmen. Nevertheless, the future of Operation Frantic was about to change as the maintenance crews heard the sound of aircraft above the skies of the Poltava Airfield at midnight in June 1944. They were puzzled. No one had informed them of another arrival. Then came the sound of sirens and the first Luftwaffe bombing run. The base was under attack, and they would have to depend on the Soviets to defend it. In September 1939, Adolf Hitler's Third Reich invaded Poland after it refused to settle for an agreement regarding the territory of Danzig and the construction of a railway network to connect eastern Prussia with the rest of the fatherland. As the days passed and the Wehrmacht unleashed its armored fist, the battered country was surprised by another enemy they had fought almost 2 decades before to secure their eastern borders, the Soviet Union. To the world's dismay, the Germans and Soviets worked together to take over Poland. Through the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 23, 1939, Nazi Germany and Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union accorded a non-aggression pact and the future partition of Eastern Europe, beginning with the Polish nation. Nevertheless, the Union was uneasy from the beginning, and both leaders distrusted each other. While the clock was ticking, the 2 countries readied themselves for total war. The decisive moment finally came with the launch of Operation Barbarossa in the summer of 1941. Stalin's Red Army was quickly overwhelmed by the superior tactics of the German armed forces. Retreat after retreat, the desperate Soviet Union started receiving supplies from the United States and the United Kingdom to fend off the Germans and their unstoppable blitzkrieg advances. During these days, the top brass of the United States Army Air Forces, or USAAF, began studying the feasibility of establishing air bases in Soviet Union territory to strike Germany and its allies, if war against the Axis ever came knocking. It soon did, through a surprise attack the Imperial Japanese Navy conducted against the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7, 1941. Therefore, the Army Air Forces expanded the concept of creating bases in the USSR to strike the Japanese home islands straight from Siberia. American emissaries and military attachés commenced making suggestions to Joseph Stalin about establishing Allied air bases in USSR territory in early 1942. Still, the Soviet dictator was too focused on pushing back the Germans from Moscow. The Soviet Air Force was still in disarray, and any chance of air cooperation from Russia was negligible. The Luftwaffe had almost annihilated the Soviet Air Forces since the invasion began, and only American support had kept it alive. Nevertheless, Stalin's position changed in 1943 after Operation Citadel and the Wehrmacht's failure to halt the Soviet advance at Kursk. The USSR now had economic and military production superiority over the German armed forces. It deployed hundreds of aircraft and tanks daily to overwhelm the Axis on the Eastern Front. During the Moscow Foreign Ministers' Conference of October 1943, the American diplomats and military personnel formally petitioned to establish Army Air Force bases in Soviet territory to Foreign Commissar Vyacheslav Molotov. A month later, in November 1943, during the Tehran Conference, President Roosevelt and his son, USAAF Colonel Elliot Roosevelt, personally told Stalin it would be extremely useful for the war effort to establish American air bases in Soviet territory. The reason was simple: shuttle bombing. This meant that bombers, flying from their home bases in the United Kingdom or Italy, could bomb a target in Axis-occupied territory and land in a different location from which they took off, to be refueled and rearmed. In addition, U.S. bomber crews would face fewer risks of shutdowns or interceptions because instead of making their way back through hostile territory, they would fly in a direction that put them out of harm's way once the bombing operation was completed. Stalin was left thinking about the proposition. Roosevelt and his son were not wrong at all. Collective effort and cooperation were necessary to continue inflicting losses against the Axis. The Army Air Forces assured Stalin and the Soviet High Command that shuttle bombing was feasible. The U.S. gave the USSR one successful example, the Doolittle Raid from April 1942. As retaliation for the Pearl Harbor attack, 16 American B-25 bombers from the 17th Bombardment Group attacked Tokyo from the USS Hornet and landed in eastern China. In addition, Stalin and his staff were provided with position papers that detailed the American bombardment and reconnaissance operations. The objective of Operation Baseball, or Frantic as it would be called later, was to establish 3 USAAF heavy bomber groups in Soviet territory until the war ended. The 3 groups would comprise around 1,300 servicemen split between the bases. Army Air Forces officers believed that if the strikes against Germany were successful, they could expand the shuttle bombing technique to the Pacific from Siberia. Furthermore, U.S. military attachés thought the Soviet-American cooperation at these bases could be used as the basis of post-war relations between the two nations, bonding both militaries through technology and research exchange. Nevertheless, relations between the Allies were not entirely amicable, and tensions slowly grew. For instance, Prime Minister Winston Churchill distrusted the USSR and knew his participation in the alliance would only last until the Third Reich crumbled. Thus, the British Royal Air Force, or RAF, refused to join Operation Frantic. Stalin's approval was received in February 1944, leading to a quick buildup of Army Air Force's logistics. American engineers commenced building 3 airfields near Poltava in eastern Ukraine to deploy B-17 flying fortresses, B-24 heavy bombers, and escort fighters such as the P-51 Mustang and the P-38 Lightning. Meanwhile, a delegation, led by U.S. Strategic Air Force's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, General Frederick Anderson, flew to Moscow aboard a B-17 bomber to demonstrate the aircraft design and bombing tactics to the Soviets. The first USAAF base was completed in April 1944 in Poltava. The base was referred to as Station 559 in case communications were compromised. Pyryatyn Airfield, dubbed Station 560, and Mirhorod Airfield, Station 561, followed next. All bases were close to the Kharkov-Kyiv Railway behind the war zone. The American airmen were warmly received by the locals, with several Poltava jazz bands performing in their honor. Vladimir Stankiewicz, a Soviet translator, recalled, quote, "They were greeted with joy. We were striking the enemy together. This was a happy event for the joint cause." Friendships were soon forged between the U.S. airmen and the Soviet mechanics. Although the Soviet Smersh counterintelligence suggested the locals and workers avoid contact with the foreigners, they enjoyed walks over the bases and were exposed to American culture. Colonel Roosevelt's 325th Reconnaissance Wing began reconnaissance operations in May 1944 between Italy, England, and Ukraine to test the upcoming bombing operations. Once done, the 15th Air Force, based in Italy, launched the first Operation Frantic shuttle bombing mission on June 2, 1944. Over 130 B-17 flying fortresses, escorted by 70 P-51 Mustangs, left Italy to bomb the marshalling yard at Debrecen, Hungary. During the flight, 30 B-17s and their P-51 escorts were diverted to bomb the Oradea, Romania marshalling yard. Under the command of Ira Eaker, commander of the Mediterranean Allied Air Forces, the mission was a success. Eaker, aboard a B-17 named Yankee Doodle 2, led his bombers to their targets without pointless contact with the Luftwaffe. The bomber fleet was received by U.S. diplomat Averell Harriman and several American and Soviet officers at the Poltava Air Base. The second bombing operation occurred on June 6, 1944, while Allied troops disembarked on the beaches of Normandy in northern France as part of Operation Overlord. The target of the 5th Bomb Wing was the Galati Airfield in Romania. More than 105 B-17s and 40 P-51s were dispatched to their objective. During the bombing run, 2 P-51s were shot down, and 8 enemy fighters were destroyed. On June 11th, the 5th Bomb Wing struck the Foscani Airfield in Romania and arrived in Italy with minimal casualties after a successful sortie. Frantic 2 fell under the shoulders of B-17s from the 13th and 45th Bomb Wings and P-51s from the 65th Fighter Wing, belonging to the 8th Air Force based in Great Britain. The bombers attacked a synthetic oil plant in Ruhlen, Germany on June 21st. Upon dropping their bomb load, the bombers were intercepted by Luftwaffe aircraft, leading to a minor skirmish with the P-51s. Although most of the air fleet made it back to the USSR without issues, the American pilots did not notice the formation was followed from afar by a lone Hinkel HE-111 bomber. The German aircraft spotted the American air bases in Ukraine and returned to its base for a retaliatory attack. One day later, The B-17s from the 45th Bomb Wing were crushed by a surprise attack on Poltava. Luftwaffe and Hungarian aircraft severely damaged the airfield. Flares were released to spot the enemy aircraft, but Soviet anti-aircraft fire was severely ineffective, and the Red Army Air Force could not provide support to the grounded American fighters. During almost 3 hours, more than 70 German and Hungarian aircraft attacked the base with pinpoint accuracy. 47 out of 73 B-17 bombers were destroyed, with multiple Soviet and American casualties. Ammunition, fuel, and other supplies were also targeted. Not a single German aircraft was taken down during the raid. The 50 caliber machine guns employed by the Soviets could not stop the attack. The surviving aircraft and the rest of the fleet from the other bases were relocated the next day to avoid more damage from upcoming German attacks. The B-17s that remained operational did not exceed 75, forming one combined combat wing out of the 3 original groups. Despite their great losses, the American air crews continued bombing targets across Axis territory over June and July 1944. Yet, the animosity between guest and host nations escalated quickly. The Americans blamed the Soviets for the disaster that fell upon them, as they had been tasked with defending the American bases with their anti-aircraft batteries and interceptors. Slowly but steadily, the U.S. troops from the 3 airfields were redeployed to Italy, reducing personnel. Operation Frantic continued until September 1944, when the USAAF forces were denied their request to deploy their aircraft to protect the bases. In addition, during the Warsaw Uprising, Stalin denied the American request to airdrop supplies to the Polish via Soviet airspace, as he wanted the Red Army to liberate Poland without foreign help. By October 1944, most U.S. servicemen were evacuated from the Soviet Union. Only some 200 were left behind for emergencies. With the conquest of most of the islands in the Pacific and the construction of airbases closer to the Japanese home islands, the U.S. was no longer interested in establishing an airbase in Siberia to shuttle bomb Japan. Consequently, the last U.S. troops left their Ukrainian bases in June 1945 to continue the fight against the Empire of the Rising Sun. In the end, the American hope to develop friendly relations with the Soviets through mutual cooperation as part of Operation Frantic ultimately did nothing but worsen them.